Everyone envied Jason when he married into one of the richest family in the country, but behind the luxury, power and expensive lifestyle was a secret so dangerous it would destroy lives, break hearts and bring an empire crashing down.
Welcome to Kashi's Stories, a place where emotions come alive, secrets are revealed, and every story carries a lesson. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable stories. Now, let's begin.
There was a saying Jason often repeated to himself: "Nobody respects a poor man." He believed it with all his heart. Ever since he was a teenager, Jason had been obsessed with success. While his friends talked about football, music, and relationship, Jason spent most of his time dreaming about expensive cars, luxury houses, and a life where money would never be a problem. He hated struggling. He hated depending on people. Most of all, he hated the idea of being ordinary. By the age of 29, Jason had achieved more than many people his age. He worked as a financial analyst at one of the largest firms in the city. He wore expensive suits, drove a decent car, lived in a comfortable apartment. To outsiders, his life looked successful, but Jason wasn't satisfied, not even close. Every morning on his way to work, he passed through the city's wealthiest neighborhood. Massive mansions stood behind toll gates, luxury vehicles lined the driveway, private security guards stood at entrances. Each time he passed those houses, something stirred inside him. Jealousy. He wanted that life, not someday, as soon as possible. And that desire only grew stronger with time. Despite his ambitions, there was one person who truly loved him for who he was. Her name was Emily. Emily worked as a primary school teacher. She was intelligent, kind, and carried a warmth that made people feel comfortable around her. Unlike Jason, she didn't measure success by money. She believed happiness came from meaningful relationships, peace of mind, and honest work. The two had been together for almost 3 years. Everyone expected them to get married soon, including Emily. One Saturday afternoon, they sat together at a small cafe overlooking a quiet park. Children played nearby while couples strolled hand in hand. Emily smiled as she stirred her coffee. "I heard Sarah got engaged." Jason looked up briefly. "Really?" "Yes." "Good for her." Emily studied him. "Don't you ever think about marriage?" Jason forced a smile. "Of course I do." "Then why do you always change the subject whenever we talk about it?" For a moment, Jason didn't answer. The truth was simple. Marriage wasn't his priority. Money was. In his mind, he needed to become rich first. Extremely rich. Only then would he think about settling down. "I just want to be more established first," he finally said. Emily nodded slowly. "I understand." And she genuinely did. That was one of the reasons Jason loved her. Emily never pressured him, never demanded expensive gifts, never complained about what he couldn't provide. She accepted him exactly as he was. Unfortunately, Jason was beginning to see that as a weakness rather than a strength. Deep down, he wanted more, something more exciting, something more glamorous, something that reflected the wealthy future he imagined for himself. Several weeks later, an opportunity arrived that would change everything. Jason's company announced a major corporate fundraising gala. The event will bring together influential politicians, business executives, investors, and wealthy families from across the country. For employees, it was more than a social event. It was a networking opportunity, a chance to meet powerful people, a chance to climb higher. Jason was excited. The night of the event, the ballroom looked magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Elegant decorations filled the room. Luxury cars lined the entrance. The atmosphere screamed wealth. Exactly the kind of environment Jason loved. As guests arrived, he moved from group to group, introducing himself and making connections. Then something caught his attention. The room suddenly seemed to shift. Heads turned. Conversation paused. People began whispering. Curious, Jason followed their gaze. A young woman had just entered the ballroom. She was stunning, elegant green dress, confident posture, expensive jewelry, the kind of beauty that commanded attention without trying. Beside her walked an older man whose face Jason immediately recognized, Richard Sterling, one of the country's most celebrated businessmen, owner of Sterling's Holdings, a man whose name appeared regularly in business magazines and television interviews. His estimated wealth was worth hundreds of millions. Jason had read countless articles about him, and standing beside him was his daughter, Victoria Sterling. She carried herself with a confidence that seemed almost effortless. For reasons he couldn't explain, Jason found himself staring. "That's Victoria Sterling." A colleague suddenly appeared beside him. Jason nodded. "I know." Throughout the evening, he found himself noticing Victoria repeatedly. She laughed with guests, spoke with executives, moved comfortably among the wealthy elites. Watching her felt like watching someone who belonged to the world he desperately wanted to enter. The world of privilege, the world of influence, the world of unlimited opportunities. As the night continued, fate unexpectedly intervened. Near the refreshment area, Victoria accidentally dropped her phone. Before she could react, Jason picked it up. "Here you go." Victoria smiled. "Thank you." For a brief moment, their eyes met. Then she extended her hand. "I'm Victoria." Jason shook it. Jason. What began as a simple introduction turned into a conversation. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes, longer than either expected. To Jason's surprise, Victoria seemed genuinely interested in talking to him. When they eventually parted ways, she smiled. "It was nice meeting you." "You too." As she walked away, Jason couldn't stop thinking about her. Not because he was in love, not because of her beauty, but because of what she represented: opportunity, status, wealth, a shortcut into the life he had always wanted. Later that night, Jason returned home. Emily had left several messages asking how the event went. He looked at his phone, then at the business card Victoria had given him. For several seconds, he remained silent. Something had changed. A door had opened. And Jason was already thinking about walking through it, even if it meant leaving something important behind. The phone screen glowed in the darkness. Emily's messages remained unread. Victoria's business card sat on the table. One represented genuine love. The other represented wealth and status. Jason stared at both, unaware that the decision he was about to make would change his life forever. Jason could not stop thinking about Victoria. For days after the gala, her face remained in his mind. It wasn't just her beauty. It wasn't even her personality. It was the life that surrounded her, the luxury, the influence, the opportunity. Everything Jason had spent years chasing seemed to exist effortlessly in her world. Several times, he picked up the business card she had given him. Several times, he put it back down. He told himself he was only interested in networking, nothing more. But deep inside, he knew that wasn't entirely true. One afternoon, while sitting in his office, his phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Jason answered. "Hello." "Hi, Jason." The voice immediately sounded familiar. "Victoria." Jason sat upright in his chair. "Victoria," she laughed softly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all. I was wondering if you would like to grab coffee sometime." For a moment, Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. Victoria Sterling was inviting him out. His heart raced. "Sure," he replied. "I'll like that." They agreed to meet that weekend. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but after the call ended, Jason found himself smiling. Not because he had developed feelings for Victoria. At least, that's what he told himself. The truth was that he felt closer to the world he had always admired, a world that had always seemed out of reach. That Saturday, Jason arrived at one of the city's most exclusive cafes, the kind of place where luxury cars fill the parking a lot, the kind of place where successful people conducted business over expensive coffee. Victoria was already there. She looked elegant as always, confident, graceful, comfortably in a world that still felt unfamiliar to Jason. When she saw him, she smiled warmly. "I'm glad you came. So am I." What Jason expected to be a short meeting quickly turned into several hours of conversation. To his surprise, Victoria was easy to talk to. She wasn't arrogant. She wasn't rude. In fact, she seemed surprisingly down to earth. They discussed business, travel, family, personal goals. For the first time, Jessie began seeing her as more than just a symbol of wealth. Still, the attraction he felt wasn't entirely personal. Every time she mentioned a family vacation abroad, every time she casually discussed multi-million-dollar projects, every time she spoke about her father's business empire, Jason felt himself becoming more fascinated. By the end of the afternoon, he knew one thing. He wanted to see her again. Meanwhile, Emily noticed changes, small changes at first. Jason became slower to reply to messages. He cancelled plans more often. Phone conversation became shorter. His attention seemed divided. One evening, Emily sat across from him at dinner. She watched him check his phone for what felt like the 10th time. "Everything okay?" Jason looked up. "Of course. You seem distracted lately." "I'm just busy with work." Emily nodded, but she wasn't convinced. Something felt different. The man sitting in front of her looked the same, yet somehow felt far away. Over the following weeks, Jason and Victoria spent more time together. Coffee meeting became lunch. Lunches became dinners. Dinners became regular outing. They visited art exhibitions, business conferences, charity events, places Jason had never imagined himself attending. Slowly, he began entering Victoria's world, and the deeper he entered, the less interested he became in his old life. One evening, Victoria invited him to a private charity fundraiser hosted by her father. The event took place at the Sterling family mansion. When Jason arrived, he was speechless. The event took place at the Sterling family mansion. When Jason arrived, he was speechless. The property looked more like a luxury resort than a home. Beautiful gardens stretched across acres of land. Luxury vehicles lined the driveway. Uniformed staff welcomed guests at the entrance. Everything about the place screamed wealth. As Jason walked through the mansion, he felt a mixture of admiration and envy. This was the life he wanted. This was the future he imagined. And for the first time, it felt close even to touch. During the event, Richard Stanley approached him. The billionaire extended his hand confidently. "Jason, Mr. Stanley." Victoria's father smiled. "My daughters speak highly of you." Jason felt honored. "Thank you, sir." Richard studied him carefully. "I hear you are doing very well in finance." "I try my best." "That's a good attitude." The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but Jason couldn't hide how pleased he felt. One of the country's most powerful businessmen had noticed him. To Jason, that meant everything. What he didn't know was that Richard had his own reason for paying attention. Later that night, after most guests had left, Victoria stepped onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. The cool evening breeze bruised against her face. Moments later, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. A smile appeared instantly. The message was from Ethan. "Can we meet tomorrow?" Victoria stared at the message. For a moment, the noise from the party disappeared. Her thoughts drifted somewhere else, to a different life, to a different future, to a man she had never truly stopped loving. The next afternoon, she met Ethan at a quiet park on the edge of the city. Unlike Jason, Ethan didn't wear expensive suits. He didn't drive luxury cars, and he certainly didn't have influential connections. But there was something about him that made Victoria feel alive. As soon as she saw him, she smiled. Ethan smiled back. "You look beautiful." Victoria laughed. "You always say that." "Because it's true." For a while, they talked about ordinary things, but eventually, the conversation turned serious. "You've been spending a lot of time with that banker, Jason." Victoria sighed. "It's not what you think." Ethan looked unconvinced. "Then what is it?" Victoria hesitated. She didn't know how to explain. The truth was complicated. She cared about Jason, but she loved Ethan. The problem was her father. Richard Stanley couldn't stand Ethan. Not because he was poor. Richard himself had grown up with very little. That wasn't the issue. The problem was Ethan's attitude. Over the years, Ethan had moved from one opportunity to another without commitment. He quit jobs, ignored responsibilities, made promises he rarely kept. Richard saw him as unreliable, a man who wasn't prepared for marriage, a man who couldn't provide stability, and no matter how much Victoria defended him, her father refused to change his opinion. Back at the mansion, Richard Stanley sat inside his office, reviewing documents. A trusted assistant stood nearby. "She's still seeing Ethan?" Richard sighed heavily. "I know." "And Jason?" A faint smile appeared on Richard's face. "Jason is different." The assistant nodded. "More responsible, much more." Richard leaned back in his chair. For months, he had worried about Victoria's future. But now he saw a possible solution. Jason was educated, disciplined, ambitious, everything Ethan was not. And the more time Jason spent around Victoria, the more Richard liked what he saw. What Richard didn't realize was that Jason's ambition was beginning to evolve into something dangerous. Greed. A greed powerful enough to destroy lives. Several days later, Richard invited Jason to lunch. The invitation surprised him. Very few people received personal invitation from men like Richard Sterling. As Jason entered the exclusive restaurant, excitement filled his chest. He had no idea that this lunch would become one of the most important moments of his life. Because before the meal ended, Richard Sterling was going to offer him something he had dreamed about for years, a chance to move closer to wealth, power, and influence than ever before. As Jason was about to discover just how difficult it is to resist temptation, Jason sat quietly across from Richard Sterling. The elegant restaurant buzzed with soft conversation around them, but Jason barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the billionaire sitting opposite him. Richard took a sip of water before placing the glass back on the table. Then he looked directly at Jason. "I've been watching your progress." Jason sat up slightly. "Sir?" Richard smiled. "You remind me of myself when I was younger." Jason wasn't sure how to respond. Coming from a man like Richard Sterling, that sounded like a compliment of the highest order. "You work hard," Richard continued. "You are disciplined. You think ahead." Jason nodded politely. "Thank you, sir." Richard leaned back in his chair. "The problem with most people is that they wait for opportunities." He paused. "Successful people create them." Jason listened carefully. Every word felt important. Every sentence felt like a lesson. For years, he had admired wealthy businessmen from afar. Now he was sitting face to face with one of the most powerful men in the country. Richard folded his hands. "Tell me something honestly." Jason nodded. "Of course." "What do you want from life?" The question caught him by surprise. For a moment, Jason hesitated. Then he decided to be honest. "I want success." Richard smiled. "Everyone says that." Jason continued. "I want financial freedom." "Good." "I want influence." Richard nodded. "And?" Jason took a deep breath. "I don't want to struggle for the rest of my life." The billionaire's smile widened. Now they were finally speaking the same language. Richard understood ambition. In fact, ambition was one of the reasons he had become successful. The difference was that he recognized something in Jason, a hunger, a desire to rise above ordinary life. Jason leaned forward. "What if I told you there was a faster path?" Jason felt his heartbeat increase. "A faster path?" Richard nodded. "Yes." For a few seconds, silence settled between them. Then Richard finally spoke. "I would like you to join Stanley Holdings." Jason blinked. For a moment, he wondered if he had heard correctly. "Sir?" Richard smiled. "You heard me." Jason stared at him. His mind struggled to process the words. Stanley Holdings was one of the most respected companies in the country. Thousands of professionals would dream of receiving such an offer, and now it was being handed directly to him. Richard continued, "We have an opening in our financial strategy division." Jason remained speechless. The opportunity sounded unreal. The salary alone would be more than double his current earnings. But money wasn't the only thing that excited him. Working at Stanley's Holdings meant prestige, influence, powerful connection, a direct route into the world he had spent years admiring. "I don't know what to say." Richard laughed softly. "Say yes." Jason couldn't help smiling. Inside, he already knew his answer. The opportunity was too good to ignore, too valuable to reject. When lunch finally ended, Jason shook Richard's hand. "Thank you, sir." Richard smiled. "I believe this will be the beginning of something great." As Jason walked out of the restaurant, his thoughts raced. Everything was changing. The future suddenly looked brighter, bigger, more exciting. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely close to achieving the success he had always wanted. Over the next few weeks, Jason settled into his new role at Stanley's Holdings. The company headquarters was unlike anything he had experienced before. The offices were luxurious. The employees were highly accomplished. Every meeting involved influential people. Every day exposed him to opportunities that had once seemed impossible. Jason quickly adapted. His intelligence impressed senior executives. Even Richard occasionally praised him during meetings. The recognition floored him. He worked longer hours, attended more events, accepted every opportunity that came his way. And slowly, almost without realizing it, he became part of the Stanley family's inner circle. Victoria was often present at company's function, charity events, business dinners, private gatherings. The more time they spent together, the closer they became. Jason enjoyed her company. She was intelligent, confident, and unlike many wealthy people, she treated him with genuine respect. But what Jason enjoyed most was the world that surrounded her, a world of luxury, influence, and endless opportunity. Meanwhile, Emily watched the distance between them grow. At first, she tried to be understanding. She knew Jason's new job demanded more of his time. But as weeks turned into months, the excuses became harder to believe. Date nights were cancelled. Calls went unanswered. Messages received brief replies, sometimes no replies at all. One evening, Emily sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. She had sent Jason a simple message hours earlier. No response. She looked around the room. Photographs of happier days decorated the walls. Pictures from birthdays, vacation, celebration, moments when she believed their future was certain. A tear rolled down her cheek. Something was changing, and she could feel it. Back at Stanley's Holdings, Jason barely noticed. His focus remained fixed on success. Every achievement pushed him further. Every opportunity made him want more. More money, more influence, more recognition. One afternoon, Victoria invited him to a private family gathering at a luxurious beach house owned by the Sterlings. As Jason arrived, he felt as though he had stepped into another world. Luxury yachts floated on the water. Sports cars lined the driveway. Successful business leaders filled the property. Everything looked perfect. As he stood overlooking the ocean, Jason found himself imagining a future there, a future where he belonged, a future where wealth was no longer something he'd admire from a distance. Later that evening, Richard watched Jason from across the gathering. The billionaire smiled quietly. The more he observed Jason, the more convinced he became. This was the kind of man he wanted around his daughter. Responsible, driven, ambitious, everything Ethan was not. What Richard didn't know was that Victoria's heart remained somewhere else entirely. That night, after most guests had left, Victoria sat alone near the beach. The sound of waves filled the darkness. Her phone vibrated. A message appeared. It was from Ethan. "I miss you." Victoria stared at the screen. A sad smile appeared on her face. Despite everything happening around her, one truth remained unchanged. She still loved him. And sooner or later, that truth would create problem for everyone involved. Emily could not take it anymore. For months, she had watched Jason drift further away. The late night calls had disappeared. The surprise visits had stopped. The man who once made her feel like the most important person in the world now treated her like an afterthought. And deep down, she already knew why. One evening, after another unanswered message, Emily made a decision. She called Jason. To her surprise, he answered. Hello, we need to talk. Jason immediately sensed the seriousness in her voice. Emily, not on the phone. A long silence followed. Finally, Jason sighed. Okay. They agreed to meet at a small restaurant they used to visit years ago, a place filled with memories, the place where Jason had first told her he loved her, the place where they had celebrated promotions, birthdays, and anniversaries, a place that once represented happiness, but tonight felt different. When Emily arrived, Jason was already there. He stood up politely as she approached. Neither smiled, neither looked happy. The tension between them was impossible to ignore. For a few moments, neither spoke. Then Emily finally broke the silence. Who is she? Jason froze. The question hit him harder than expected. What? The woman you've been spending all your time with. Jason looked away. Emily nodded slowly. His reaction told her everything. There is someone. It's not like that. Emily laughed bitterly. It never is. Jason remained silent. The silence only made things worse. For months, Emily had fought against her suspicions. Now they were becoming reality. Do you love her? The question felt like a knife. Jason opened his mouth, then closed it again because he didn't know how to answer. Did he love Victoria or did he love what she represented? The wealth, the opportunities, the future. Jason smiled sadly because at that moment he finally understood the cost of his choices. He has spent years chasing wealth only to discover that character mattered more. He had abandoned genuine love only to learn that money could never replace loyalty. The truth was that he no longer knew, and that uncertainty hurt Emily more than any answer could have. Tears filled her eyes. After everything we've been through, Jason lowered his head. Guilt flooded through him. Emily had stood by him during difficult years, when money was tight, when opportunities were scarce, when nobody believed in him. She had believed, she had supported him, she had sacrificed, and now he was struggling to give her the one thing she deserved: honesty. Emily, his voice cracked, but she raised her hand. Don't. The tears finally rolled down her cheeks. I already know. For several seconds, neither spoke. The relationship that had once seemed unbreakable was falling apart before their eyes, and neither knew how to stop it. Finally, Emily stood up. Her legs felt weak, her heart felt shattered, but she refused to cry in front of him any longer. I hope she's worth it. Those words hit Jason harder than anything else she had said. Emily turned and walked away. This time she didn't look back. Jason remained seated long after she left, staring at the empty chair across from him, feeling something he had not felt in a long time: fear, because despite everything he had gained, something important had just slipped away. Meanwhile, Victoria faced a different battle. Her father had become increasingly vocal about Jason. Every family dinner seemed to include his name. Every conversation somehow returned to him. One evening, Richard finally stopped pretending. I think Jason will make an excellent husband. Victoria nearly dropped her fork. Dad, I'm serious. Victoria sighed heavily. Not again. Richard continued. He has ambition. He has discipline. He knows how to build a future. Everything Ethan supposedly lacked. Victoria already knew where the conversation was heading. You still don't approve of Ethan. Richard's expression hardened. No. The answer came immediately. No, I don't. Victoria felt frustration rising. You don't even give him a chance. I've given him plenty of chances. Richard's voice remained calm. But every time I look at him, I see someone who refuses to take responsibility. Victoria looked away. Part of her hated hearing those words. Another part of her feared they might be true. Because Ethan's life had remained largely unchanged. He still jumped between opportunities, still struggled with consistency, still talked more about future plans than actual progress. Even so, Victoria loved him, and love rarely listened to logic. A few days later, Ethan asked to meet her. The moment they sat down together, Victoria noticed something. He seemed frustrated, angry, tired. I can't keep doing this. Victoria's heart sank. What do you mean? Ethan leaned forward. Your father is never going to accept me. Victoria remained silent because she had begun to realize the same thing. Ethan continued. And now this Jason guy is everywhere. The jealousy in his voice was obvious. Victoria reached for his hand. Ethan. No. He shook his head. I'm serious. For months, Ethan had tried to stay patient, tried to trust her. But now he felt as though he was slowly losing her. Not to another man, but to another lifestyle. A lifestyle he could not compete with. You belong in that world. Victoria's eyes widened. What? The rich people, the powerful people, the successful people. Ethan, you do. Victoria immediately shook her head. No. But even she knew things were changing. The pressure from her father was becoming impossible to ignore. The pressure from society was growing stronger. And for the first time, doubt entered her mind. Could love alone really be enough? Back to Sterling's holdings. Jason buried himself in work, partly to distract himself, partly to avoid thinking about Emily. But guilt followed him everywhere, at meetings, at events, at home. He kept replaying their final conversation, our tears, our disappointment, our heartbreak. The memory haunted him. Yet, despite the guilt, he continued moving forward. And the closer he moved toward the Stanley family, the harder it became to turn back. Weeks later, Richard invited Jason to a private dinner at the family mansion. Only a few people attended. The atmosphere felt personal, almost intentional. After dinner, Richard and Jason found themselves alone on a terrace overlooking the gardens. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Richard broke the silence. You care about Victoria. Jason froze. The statement wasn't a question, it was an observation. Richard smiled slightly. And I believe she cares about you too. Jason's mind raced. He knew exactly what Richard was implying. The billionaire turned towards him. You have a bright future ahead of you. Jason remained silent. Richard continued, I think you and Victoria will make a good team. The word echoed in Jason's mind. A good team, a future, an opportunity. Everything he had spent years chasing seemed to be standing directly in front of him. And for the first time, Jason stopped fighting the temptation because deep down he had already begun making his choice, a choice that would break one heart and possibly destroy several more. 3 months later, everything seemed perfect, at least on the surface. Jason had become one of the most trusted people within Stanley's holdings. His influence inside the company continued to grow. Richard Stanley relied on him more than ever. And perhaps most importantly, Jason and Victoria were now officially together. The announcement quickly spread through business circles. Friends congratulated them. The media celebrated them. Many people described them as the perfect couple, successful, elegant, powerful. Everything appeared to be falling into place. For Jason, it felt like the reward he had spent years chasing, the luxurious lifestyle, the exclusive events, the powerful connections, the respect that came with being associated with one of the country's wealthiest families. Everything he once dreamed about was finally becoming reality. Meanwhile, Emily was doing her best to move forward. The breakup had broken her heart. For weeks, she struggled to accept what had happened. But eventually, she stopped waiting for calls that would never come, stopped hoping Jason would return, stopped blaming herself. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her life, returning to old goals, pursuing new opportunities, learning how to be happy without him. The pain remained, but little by little she became stronger. On the other side of the city, Ethan was struggling much more. The news of Victoria and Jason's relationship had devastated him. For months, he had fought to hold on to hope, but now that hope was gone. The woman he loved had chosen a different future, or at least that's what it looked like. One evening, Ethan sat alone staring at a photograph of himself and Victoria. Memories flooded his mind. The laughter, the dreams, the promises, everything felt distant now. Yet, despite the heartbreak, one question continued to bother him. Had Victoria truly chosen Jason, or had she simply surrendered to pressure? The question refused to leave his mind. Meanwhile, preparations for Jason and Victoria's future continued. Richard could not have been happier. In Jason, he saw everything he wanted for his daughter: a man with ambition, a man with discipline, a man capable of protecting the Sterling legacy. At families' dinners, business events, and private meetings, Richard increasingly treated Jason like family, and Jason enjoyed every moment of it. For the first time in his life, he felt accepted among people he once admired from a distance. One evening, during a private dinner at the Stanley Mansion, Richard made a surprising announcement. I've decided to increase your responsibilities. Jason looked up. Sir? Richard smiled. I want you involved in some of our most important operations. Jason felt honored. The trust meant everything to him. What he didn't realize was that the decision would soon place him directly in the path of a disaster capable of destroying everything. Several weeks later, unusual rumors began circulating within financial circles. At first, Nobody paid attention. Large corporations attracted rumors all the time, but these rumors were different. Government investigators had reportedly begun examining several major companies, including Stanley Holdings. When Jason first heard the story, he dismissed it. Surely it was nothing serious. Companies faced audits and reviews all the time. There was no reason to panic. But Richard reacted differently. The moment the rumors reached him, concern appeared on his face, concern that Jason had never seen before. For the first time since meeting him, Richard Stanley looked nervous. Days later, investigators officially contacted Stanley's Holdings. The news spread quickly. Employees whispered in hallways. Executives held emergency meetings. Questions multiplied, but answers remained scarce. Jason tried convincing himself everything will be fine. Yet something felt wrong, very wrong. One afternoon, while reviewing company documents, he noticed unusual transactions, large amounts of money moving through accounts in ways that seemed difficult to explain. At first, he assumed there was a reasonable explanation, but the deeper he looked, the more uncomfortably it became. Eventually, he requested clarification from one of the senior executives. The response was immediate. "Don't ask questions." Jason frowned. The answer only increased his suspicion. For days, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Then came the shocking breakthrough. Government investigators publicly announced the discovery of evidence involving financial crimes linked to several companies connected to Stanley Holdings. Money laundering, fraud, illegal offshore accounts. The accusation stunned the public. News channels exploded with coverage. Social media erupted. Business leaders scrambled to distance themselves, and suddenly the Stanley Empire stood at the center of a national scandal. Victoria could hardly believe it. Jason was equally shocked, but Richard knew the truth. The investigation was real, and the evidence was serious. For years, hidden beneath the success, luxury, and influence, dangerous secrets had existed. Secrets carefully buried, secrets protected by power. Now those secrets were being exposed one by one. The pressure became overwhelming. Investors withdrew support. Business partners disappeared. Companies' shares collapsed. The empire Richard spent decades building began crumbling before his eyes. Then came the final blow. Authorities issued arrest warrants. Several executives were taken into custody, including Richard Stanley. The news shocked the nation. Television cameras surrounded the Stanley mansion. Reporters crowded every entrance. As police vehicles arrived, Victoria watched in disbelief. Her father, the man she had always viewed as powerful and untouchable, was being led away in handcuffs. Tears filled her eyes. The empire was gone. The reputation was gone. Everything was falling apart. And for the first time, Jason was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The future he had sacrificed so much to obtain no longer existed. The wealth, the influence, the power, all of it was disappearing. In a matter of weeks, his dream collapsed. That night, Jason sat alone in his apartment. The silence felt unbearable. His mind replayed every major decision he had made: leaving Emily, choosing ambition, ignoring his conscience, pursuing a life built on status. And now, what remained? The answer was painful, almost nothing. Meanwhile, Victoria faced her own reality. For years, she had been trapped between love and expectation, between Ethan and her father's wish. Now, the man who controlled her future was gone, and for the first time, she was free to choose for herself. A few days later, she called Ethan. When he answered, neither spoke for several seconds. Then Victoria whispered softly, "I'm sorry." Ethan closed his eyes. The voice he thought he had lost forever was finally back. And in that moment, both understood something important. True love had survived what wealth could not. Several months later, Richard Stanley was convicted for multiple financial crimes. His empire was dismantled. His assets were seized. His reputation destroyed. The man who once controlled everything now had nothing. Jason eventually resigned from Stanley Holdings. The company he once viewed as a gateway to success had become a reminder of painful mistakes. One afternoon, while walking through a quiet park, he unexpectedly saw Emily. For a moment, neither moved, neither spoke. Then Jason noticed something. Emily looked different, stronger, happy, at peace. The woman he once took for granted had rebuilt her life without him. As Emily walked away, Jason didn't call after her. He didn't ask for another chance. Some mistakes cannot be undone. Some lessons arrive too late. And as he watched her disappear into the distance, he realized the greatest loss of his life was never the fortune that vanished. It was the woman who had loved him when he had nothing.